Welcome to Agentuity V1, a new and revamped full-stack platform for your AI agents and projects. Today I'm going to help you get set up and get started with Agentuity, and we'll take a look at the default example that you can use when you're first creating a project on the platform. Along the way, I'll explain some of the key features of V1. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first step to getting set up is running this command here to install the V1 CLI. Now the installer will help you get set up if you, for example, don't have Bun installed already, or if you have the V0 CLI, which you'll be prompted to uninstall before you can get the new CLI. I do want to note that you will have to upgrade from V0 to V1 moving forward, so the installer should help you get set up with all of that. I'll go ahead and run this, but since I already have the CLI installed, I'll just get a welcome back message. Now, if it's your first time, you'll want to go ahead and log in or create an account using Agentuity auth login. And you can go ahead and follow that and open it in your browser to continue. Now that we've authorized the device and we're logged in, we can go ahead and continue by running the Agentuity create command. It'll prompt us for a region, so we can go ahead and select one of those. And then we'll give a unique name for this project. So it'll go ahead and set up everything for us. And once it's done, we can see what the next step is. So as we continue with the setup process, it'll ask you about some other key features like setting up a SQL database. We'll go ahead and skip that for now. We'll go ahead and skip any storage buckets as well. You can also configure custom domains, but we'll go ahead and just click enter to skip, and we'll add authentication later on if we need it. So now that our project's been created, we'll go ahead and just open it up and take a look at the project structure to see a bit more about what you get with a default template or default example in Agentuity. So once we open that up, you'll notice a few key folders here. We've got the agent folder, which is where your agent logic will live, the API folder, which has all of the HTTP routes, so how you invoke your agent, and then the web folder, which has all your front-end code. And of course, the idea behind this is to get a separation of concerns, separating your agent logic from the API layer that exposes it, and the front end that users can use to interact with it. And before we even take a look at the code, let's go ahead and just show you an example to help you better contextualize what we're going to see later on. To go ahead and run this project, we can run bun run dev to spin up the dev server, or Agentuity dev works as well. So once we run that command, you'll see a few links here, and we'll talk more about these in just a second, but we'll go ahead and launch this default template. And you'll notice that it's a basic translation agent. So you can choose from a few different languages and a few different models. And we give you this default text that you can go ahead and translate or edit based on whatever you want to try out. And you'll notice that we track the recent translations down here. So once we click on this, we should be able to see all the previous runs that we've had. So we'll go ahead and translate that. Once that translation comes in, you can see the output and a few other key pieces of information. So in this case, we're printing out the thread ID, which is sort of like a wrapper around all the conversations that we have with this agent across different sessions. And of course, we also have the session ID, which is the unique identifier for that translation request that we just made. And we're also using the thread state, which we'll take a look at later, to store all the recent translations that we've made. So now that we've seen the default template in action, we can go ahead and take a look at the code and see how it all works under the hood. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the agent logic first, and you'll see we have that translate folder, which is where our agent code lives. And one of the first things that you might notice is that the default template has a lot of comments and helpful tips to get you started in case you ever want to go back and learn more about how this all works. But again, as we mentioned, we're going to translate text using different models thanks to our AI gateway, and we're going to go ahead and store the translation history using threads. And you'll notice here that we're using our built-in lightweight Agentuity schema. So there's no need for Zod or any external libraries, although we do support that as well. And looking at the code, you'll see that we define the history entry that we actually store in the recent translations. And then we also have schemas defined for the agent input and agent output using that built-in schema library. Just like any schema library, you can go ahead and define different fields with things like enums, strings, numbers, and more. And you can even configure certain fields to be optional and also add helpful descriptions to those fields as well. Now, schemas in V1 give you two different things. Runtime validation, so errors get caught before your agent even runs, and full TypeScript type inference, so your agent handler parameters are typed automatically. And the best part is, and we'll see this a little bit later, that type safety flows end to end, from your agent logic all the way through to the front end. But if we keep moving, we'll see that we have our agent definition down here using create agent, and we'll give it a name and an optional description as well. Here's where we define that schema for the input and the output, and then we reach the agent handler, or the main piece of logic for this agent. In this case, we're going to use context.logger to access the Agentuity logger. And this has built-in OpenTelemetry support, so we can see nice waterfall diagrams and see full tracing about exactly what our translate agent is doing. From here, you'll notice that we're logging a few key pieces of information like the thread ID and the session ID that you saw on the front end earlier. And then we're just going to go ahead and build out our prompt, so translating it to the language that's been selected. And then we'll just call OpenAI via the AI gateway. And so one really cool thing about this is that those calls are automatically routed and tracked, so you can get unified billing. We'll also go ahead and grab the token usage and add that translation to our history. So there's that new entry for all the translations that we show. We'll go ahead and use context.thread.state.push. And so in this case, across all the different sessions that we have within a thread, so within a wrapper around those sessions, we can go ahead and use a sliding window to keep the last 5 entries, so the last 5 translations. And then we'll go ahead and log a bit of extra information, and then go ahead and return this from our agent. So that's 1/3 of sort of the puzzle that this default template gives you. And so the next thing that we'll look at is the sort of bridge between your agent and the front end, which is the API routes. So we can head over to the API section, and you'll notice that we have this create router. And what this is going to do is give you an extended Hono instance. And Hono is built right in as a first-class web framework. So building APIs should feel native from the start. And you get all the standard methods like get, post, delete, so on and so forth, as well as some Agentuity specifics for WebSockets, cron jobs, and more. All of that would be defined in your API folder. So in this case, we've got a couple of different endpoints, including the one that we use to call the agent to actually translate text. So the translate endpoint. And you'll notice that we have this translate validator. And so this is middleware that automatically validates the incoming request against our agent schema. So if someone sends invalid data, we see that and handle that before our agent even runs. And so when we come in here and access that data, we know that that's in the right schema and the right format, and we can just use that to call the translate agent using translate.run. And we can do that, of course, since we've imported the agent itself from the translate/agent file, and send that the data to actually kick off this translation. So in other words, we're passing that validated data and getting back a typed result. We also have a few more endpoints here, like getting the actual translation history. And you'll notice that for this, we use c.var.thread.state.get. And the sort of equivalent of that is context. So on and so forth for agents. So that's sort of the pattern that you see here. And then lastly, we have an endpoint to clear the translation history. And now lastly, of course, we'll take a look at the front end. And one of the really cool parts about V1 is that you can deploy a front end alongside your agents, alongside your API routes, all from within a single project. So to do that, we'll go ahead and take a look at the web folder, and we'll take a look at the app.tsx. So you'll notice that we have this useAPI hook, and the way we're using that is passing the HTTP method and the route as a string. On the other side, we're getting back the data, an invoke function, and the loading state. So this is sort of inspired by TanStack query, if you're familiar with how that works. There's also a use analytics hook, which gives you a track function, which in this case, the default template uses to track translations and clear events, so when we clear that translation history. And then the UI itself is built using Tailwind CSS. So if you're looking to get started and you want to use Tailwind for your own projects, once you create a project and get the default template, you can easily use this code as a reference. And we won't go into detail about this, but you can see where we have the translation form, the dropdown for all the different options that you have, translation result, and so on and so forth. And we also have these tooltips that give you some information about what thread state is and what session IDs are. Now, one final thing that I want to mention is the fact that we also show you how to use evals in this default example. So if we go back to the agent folder, we can see that we also have, alongside the agent.ts and evals.ts. And so one of the key features, or another key feature of V1, is the fact that we have a full evaluation suite for your agents. Because of course, you might want to monitor your agents and make sure that they're behaving the way that you intend. And so this example shows 2 different evals for the translation agent. The first is called adversarial, and it shows the first flavor of evals that you get on Agentuity, which is a score eval. So this will be scored from 0 to 1. And in this case, what adversarial does is tell us if the response resisted adversarial attempts. The other type of eval is pass-fail, so binary evals. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and import from the preset set of evals, and then go ahead and create an eval using agent.createEval. You can also pass it some optional middleware, which in this case, we're going to use to transform that input and that output to the shape that we want. Of course, you can also define custom evals, and in this case, we're going to do that again for the simple language match. So for that, we're going to go ahead and set up a schema, and then again use agent.createEval, give it a name, a description, just like you would with agents. And then we have that handler. So we'll log some more information, have some fallback logic as well. And then here's where we actually use an LLM to determine if it's written in the right language. So that's what our eval logic does. And then we'll go ahead and get the result back. So we'll see if it passed or not. And we can also grab the reason, which you can use to determine why the eval passed or failed or had a certain score if it's not a binary eval. And you can also set up some optional metadata for your evals as well. So in this case, we're just tracking the targeted and detected language for a bit more observability. And so one final thing that I want to talk about is Workbench, which is the visual UI that you get on Agentuity when you're testing your agents locally. Now to add Workbench, you can go over to the agentuity.config.ts file and go ahead and add Workbench like you see here. You can change the route that you want the UI to be served at and also pass in custom headers to be sent alongside your Workbench requests. For us, we're just going to keep things simple and default. And now to actually try this out, we can go ahead and just launch the dev server. So bun run dev. Now we can go ahead and head back to our UI. And since we have that Workbench route, we can go ahead and do /workbench. And you'll see that we have a nice UI here that shows you the schema for your agent. So the input and output schema that we've defined. And you can choose between different agents if you've got multiple agents in your project. And we'll go ahead and choose from either a template, empty schema structure, or you can actually add some mock data. So in this case, we can go ahead and actually test this out and see if our agent is working without needing to spin up the front end. And we can see the response there. And you also get the translation count, tokens, all the other things that we returned from our agent as well. And the last thing that I want to show is the web app, where you can see all your sessions, those OpenTelemetry traces and waterfalls that I talked about earlier, and get more information about your project in general. So here you can see your agents and your routes. So that's where we have those descriptions for the agent that we created and all the different routes that we have. You can also take a look at the deployments that you have and any threads that you've created as well. You can also take a look at sessions and get more information about each request that was made. And in the web app, you can also take a look at evals to see what your success rate is over time and what the pass rate is. You can also take a look at your logs, as well as web analytics if you've deployed this project and you're getting a bunch of visitors. And of course, we're building Agentuity in the open. So the SDK is open source, and you're free to take a look, open issues, or chat with us in the discussion section. We also welcome community feedback and conversation in our Discord, and you can find a link to that on our marketing website at agentuity.com. We also link to our docs there, which has a lot more information about the entire V1 platform, as well as more information about the default template itself. So we're all really excited for V1 and equally as excited to see what you build on our platform. So definitely reach out to us and let us know. But until then, thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.